These ghetto passes don't get you into first class. Step aside before I call security. Vanessa Matthews' voice sliced through the ambient noise of JFK's Terminal 4. Her lips curled into a contemptuous sneer as she shoved the boarding passes back across the counter with manicured fingernails. 10:47 a.m., Gate D36, JFK International Airport. The international terminal pulsed with the controlled chaos of global travel. Announcements echoed in multiple languages, bouncing off gleaming floors and glass partitions. The acrid smell of burnt coffee mingled with duty-free perfume and the unmistakable anxiety of travelers rushing to destinations. Roller bags clattered across the polished floors, creating a constant, percussive backdrop to the hum of thousands of conversations. Amara and Aisha Reynolds stood frozen at the Meridian Airlines counter, twin statues of shock amidst the flowing current of passengers. At 16, they wore their privilege with the quiet confidence of those who had never needed to announce it. Amara, in a tailored Burberry blazer over a vintage Parisian streetwear top, her intricate box braids adorned with subtle gold cuffs. Aisha in a simple cashmere Brunello Cucinelli sweater and perfectly fitted jeans, her natural curls framing a face that mirrored her sister's in structure, but not expression. Their carry-on luggage, Amara's vintage Louis Vuitton. Aisha's sleek Rimowa sat beside them like well-behaved pets. Aisha felt her heartbeat quicken, the physical sensation of humiliation creeping up her neck like a hot rash. She took a measured breath, her analytical mind already calculating the statistical improbability of their corporate account having a fraud alert. "There's been a mistake," she said, her voice meticulously controlled, each syllable precise. "These tickets were purchased through our father's corporate account. We checked in online at 7:32 this morning. Everything was confirmed." Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she performed an exaggerated visual inspection of the twins, her gaze deliberately traveling from their natural hair to their designer luggage. Her lips pressed into a thin line of suspicion. The name tag on her Meridian Airlines uniform sat slightly askew on her blue polyester blazer, her professional smile nowhere in evidence. "Corporate account," she repeated, emphasizing the words as if they were written in quotation marks. "And what corporation might that be? Batty Hair Extensions." A few passengers in the growing line behind the twins snickered. Amara felt her cheeks flush with heat, her fingers instinctively tightening around the handle of her bag. "Nexus Technologies," she replied, her voice betraying the first hint of defensiveness. "Our father is Jackson Reynolds. He's the CEO." Vanessa let out a short, sharp laugh that ricocheted like a bullet. She made a theatrical show of typing into her computer terminal, her acrylic nails clicking loudly against the keys. The first-class boarding line behind the twins continued growing, predominantly white business travelers, checking Apple Watches and shifting impatiently, their sighs audible in the recirculated air. "Well, well," Vanessa announced, deliberately projecting her voice to reach the surrounding passengers. "The system is flagging these seats. It says the corporate account has a suspicious transaction alert on it." She paused for effect. Imagine that. The twins exchanged glances, a silent conversation flowing between them with the fluency of those who had shared every moment of existence, from the womb to this humiliating present. "That's impossible," Aisha said, stepping forward. She pulled out her phone, unlocking it with her thumbprint and opening the Meridian Airlines app. "I have the confirmation here. Booking reference MR78342. The payment processed successfully. Nexus Technologies has a strategic partnership with Meridian Airlines for corporate travel." Vanessa leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. "Listen, girls, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but these are $12,000 seats. We can't just let anyone who waltzes up with a fake story about Daddy CEO board our aircraft." Her voice was deliberately loud now, ensuring that nearby passengers could overhear every word. Several heads turned toward the confrontation, some already pulling out phones, sensing the potential for viral content. "Our father is Jackson Reynolds," Amara repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You can call Meridian Corporate Headquarters. Ask for Sofia Martinez. They know exactly who he is." Vanessa's expression flickered briefly at the mention of the CEO's name, uncertainty crossing her features like a passing shadow before hardening into dismissive resolve. "Reynolds?" She emphasized the name with exaggerated skepticism. "Sure, honey. And I'm Serena Williams' personal stylist." She pushed their documents further across the counter, nearly sending them over the edge. Step aside now. Real passengers need to board. The humiliation crashed over the twins like a physical wave, hot and suffocating. Amara's fingers trembled. Aisha's jaw clenched so tightly she could hear her teeth creak. They had traveled the world their entire lives, had sipped fresh coconut juice on private beaches in the Maldives, had attended fashion shows in Milan, had taken midnight helicopter rides over the Grand Canyon, and now they were being treated like criminals at a boarding gate. "This is outrageous," Amara said, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You haven't even properly checked our identification. You're just looking at us and making assumptions." A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit huffed audibly behind them. "Some of us have legitimate tickets and places to be," he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Vanessa's smile returned now, sharp and triumphant, bolstered by the apparent support. "Security concern," she stage whispered to the man with a conspiratorial nod. "Happens more often than you'd think." 11:05 a.m., 25 minutes to scheduled boarding. The situation escalated as Thomas Wilson arrived, his stride purposeful and proprietary, his Meridian Airlines management badge prominently displayed on a lanyard against his crisp blue shirt. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced and empty. The twins couldn't know it, but Thomas was far more than just a supervisor. He was Meridian's regional director of passenger experience, overseeing operations at 7 major East Coast airports. His quarterly bonuses were directly tied to fraud prevention metrics that had been dramatically improved by the implementation of the enhanced passenger verification program he had championed 18 months earlier. "What seems to be the issue here, Vanessa?" he asked, his voice carrying the rehearsed authority of someone who resolved situations by making them disappear, not by finding justice. "Sir, these two are attempting to board in first class with flagged tickets," Vanessa reported efficiently, emphasizing "these two" with a subtle nod toward the girls. "The system has identified their corporate account as highly suspicious. Possible stolen credit card." Thomas turned to the twins, his expression a practiced mask of professional concern belied by the coldness in his pale blue eyes. "Ladies, I understand this might be frustrating, but we have strict verification protocols and security compliance standards we must follow." His tone was one you might use with small children or particularly dense elderly relatives. "Passenger safety is our highest priority at Meridian." "The tickets are legitimate," Aisha insisted, her analytical mind already cataloging the inconsistencies in their treatment alongside similar incidents they'd experienced. "The Nexus corporate account is in good standing with over $14 million in annual travel expenditures. Your system is incorrect." "I very much doubt that," Thomas replied, not even glancing at the documentation they were trying to show him. "Our NextTrack operations system is state-of-the-art, with 87% accuracy in fraud detection. If it's flagging the account, there's a reason." The bitter irony that he was dismissing tickets purchased through a system designed by their father's company wasn't lost on the twins. In fact, the NextTrack system had been implemented at Meridian through a direct partnership with Nexus Technologies, an $875 million contract that Jackson Reynolds had personally negotiated. "Our father is Jackson Reynolds," Amara tried again, the name that usually opened doors becoming increasingly desperate on her lips. "CEO of Nexus Technologies. Your airline literally runs on our company's software." Thomas exchanged a look with Vanessa, a silent communication loaded with assumption and prejudice. "Of course he is," he said soothingly, as if speaking to delusional children. "And I'm sure if that were true, Wisso, he'd have provided you with proper documentation or a letter of authorization, not just tickets that are triggering our fraud alerts." More passengers had stopped to watch the confrontation, forming a loose semicircle around the gate counter. Some were filming discreetly on their phones, sensing the potential for viral content. Others were pointedly looking away, the universal response to public humiliation relief that it wasn't happening to them. Aisha felt her heart hammering against her ribcage, her palm damp with sweat. Amara's breathing had quickened, her nails digging half-moons into her palms. They had faced microaggressions before security guards following them through luxury boutiques in Paris, teachers expressing surprise at their perfect test scores, country club staff repeatedly asking to see their membership cards, but never such a blatant, public dismissal of their very identity. "This is discrimination," Amara said, the word cutting through the ambient terminal noise like a knife. You haven't made a single phone call to verify our information. You haven't checked our passports against your system. You took one look at us and decided we didn't belong in first class. Thomas's expression hardened, the veneer of professionalism cracking slightly to reveal the cold calculation beneath. That's a very serious accusation. Young lady, this has nothing to do with how you look. It's about ticket verification and security protocols that protect all our passengers. His tone had shifted from condescending to menacing. I should warn you that making false discrimination claims is itself a form of fraud. Then verify the tickets properly, Aisha countered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Call your corporate office. Check the Nexus Technologies corporate account details. Call our father. I don't need to make any calls, Thomas said, his patience visibly thinning. The system has flagged these tickets, and my experienced gate agent has made her determination based on established security protocols. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside immediately, or I'll be forced to call airport security. The threat hung in the air, heavy with implication. The mention of security carried the weight of escalation, of potential physical removal, of handcuffs and public spectacle beyond what was already unfolding. The crowd of onlookers had grown. A white woman in her 60s nodded approvingly at Thomas's handling of the situation. A young Latino man looked uncomfortable, his eyes meeting Amara's briefly in silent support before looking away. A middle-aged black businessman watched with thinly veiled anger, recognizing a familiar scenario playing out in a different setting. This is how it always goes, he muttered to his wife, just loud enough for the twins to hear. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've achieved, they see what they want to see. 11:15 a.m. The final boarding call for Meridian Airlines flight MR392 to Paris echoed through the terminal. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner waited at the gate, its 243 passengers mostly seated. The first-class cabin's 2 empty seats a testament to the exclusion happening at the gate. Thomas made a show of checking his Rolex. Ladies, I need to close the boarding door. This is your final opportunity to step aside peacefully. The finality in his voice made it clear they had lost. The system, represented by Vanessa's smug expression and Thomas's immovable authority, had deemed them unworthy, invalid, invisible. No amount of explanation or identification would change that judgment. Aisha reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she navigated to her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the entry labeled "Dummy, Emergency Only." Their father had given them this direct line not for trivial teenage problems, but for real situations where his immediate intervention was genuinely needed. They had never used it before. Not when Amara broke her arm skiing in Aspen, not when Aisha got lost in Tokyo, not even when they were followed by store security in that boutique in Milan. But this was different. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about a system that looked at 2 black teenage girls and automatically assigned them to the category of fraudulent, suspicious, not belonging, regardless of their actual identity or status. What are you doing? Amara whispered, recognizing the look in her twin's eyes. Making a call, Aisha replied, her voice deadly calm as she memorized every detail of the scene. Thomas's name badge regional director, not mere supervisor. Vanessa's contemptuous expression, the gate number illuminated on the digital display above them. Gate D36 Terminal 4, JFK, Meridian Airlines flight MR392 to Paris. She pressed the call button, the sound of each ring echoing in her ears like a countdown to detonation. 11:15 a.m. The call was made. Jackson Reynolds was reviewing quarterly projections in Nexus Technologies' Manhattan headquarters when his phone vibrated with the distinctive pattern he had programmed for his daughter's emergency line. The sleek conference room on the 47th floor fell silent as he raised his hand, interrupting his CFO mid-sentence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but brooking no argument. The dozen executives around the gleaming ebony table watched as he stood, crossing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Aisha," he answered, his voice betraying none of the concern that immediately flooded his system. His daughters never used this line. The fact that they were doing so now sent a cold spike of adrenaline through him. "Dad," Aisha's voice came through, controlled but with an undercurrent of tension he recognized immediately. "We're at JFK, gate D36. Meridian Airlines denied us boarding for flight MR392 to Paris." Jackson's mind processed this information with the same efficiency that had built his technological empire from a dorm room startup to a Fortune 50 corporation. Denied you on what grounds? As Aisha explained the situation, the accusations, the humiliation, the closed door, Jackson felt a transformation happen within him. The concern of a father crystallized into something colder, harder, more dangerous. His free hand, hanging at his side, curled into a fist, then deliberately relaxed, finger by finger. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. His voice, if anything, became quieter, more precise, like a surgeon selecting a scalpel. "What are the names of the employees?" he asked, his tone now completely devoid of emotion. "The gate agent is Vanessa Matthews. The supervisor is Thomas Wilson, but Dad, he's actually a regional director according to his badge." Jackson's mind filed away this discrepancy. A director personally handling a boarding dispute was unusual, potentially significant. Is the plane still at the gate? Yes, they just closed the boarding door, but the jet bridge is still connected. Good. The word carried the weight of judgment, of consequence, of power about to be unleashed. "Listen to me very carefully. Aisha, do not leave the gate area. Do not speak to anyone else. Stay exactly where you are. I am handling this." He ended the call without saying goodbye. Turning back to the conference room where his executive team waited in uncomfortable silence, they had rarely seen this expression on their CEO's face, a cold, focused intensity that made several of them instinctively straighten in their chairs. "Meeting adjourned," Jackson announced, his voice leaving no room for questions. "Patricia, stay. Everyone else, out." The room emptied with remarkable speed. Patricia Alvarez, his chief technology officer and one of his longest-serving executives, remained seated, recognizing the gravity in his tone. "Meridian Airlines just denied my daughter's boarding on their flight to Paris," Jackson said once they were alone, his voice deceptively conversational. "Accused them of using fraudulent tickets on our corporate account." Patricia's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "That's impossible. They use our NextTrack system. They literally depend on our software for every aspect of their operations." Apparently, the regional director at Gate D36 didn't get that memo. Jackson's voice was controlled, but Patricia could see the rage building behind his composed exterior, like watching a tsunami gathering force offshore. "I need you to initiate emergency diagnostic mode on the NextTrack operations system for Meridian, effective immediately." Patricia's eyes widened, her fingers freezing over her tablet. "Jackson, that would ground their entire fleet. Every single aircraft. The contract has a clause." "I'm aware of the contract." He cut her off. "I personally negotiated it. $875 million for exclusive use of our proprietary NextTrack system to manage their entire operation. And now I'm telling you to put it in emergency diagnostic mode until I say otherwise." Patricia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "It'll take exactly 90 seconds to propagate across their network once I initiate it. The system will display emergency diagnostic mode, authorized by executive protocol, on every terminal in their network. Do it now. Then get our legal team working on documentation classifying this as an emergency security audit as specified in Section 47(3) of the contract." As Patricia left to execute his instructions, Jackson made one more call to Sophia Martinez, CEO of Meridian Airlines. Sophia answered on the second ring, her voice warm with familiarity. "Jackson, this is unexpected. How are—" "Sophia," he interrupted, his voice so controlled it was almost pleasant, which made the underlying menace all the more palpable. "In approximately 60 seconds, every Meridian flight in your network is going to stop moving. Your entire operation will be frozen. Your NextTrack terminals will display emergency diagnostic mode and nothing else." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What, Jackson? What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? Your employees at JFK Terminal 4, Gate D36 just denied my daughter's boarding on flight MR392 to Paris, accusing them of using fraudulent tickets. A gate agent named Vanessa Matthews and a regional director named Thomas Wilson." Another beat of silence, followed by the sound of rapid typing. Jackson, I had no idea. I'm sure there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Let me make some calls and—" "No, Sophia," Jackson cut her off again. You're not understanding me. I'm not calling to request your help. I'm calling to inform you why your airline is about to stop functioning. Your gate is closed to my family, so my software is now closed to your airline. You have exactly 20 minutes to get my daughters on that plane before I extend the diagnostic mode indefinitely. Jackson, please, this is an extreme reaction. We can resolve this without 19 minutes and 45 seconds, Jackson replied, ending the call. Inside Meridian Airlines' Central Operations Command Center in Atlanta, the first alarms began to sound at 11:17 a.m. Eastern Time. Screens that had displayed the smooth orchestration of 342 flights carrying 47,823 passengers across North America, Europe, and Asia suddenly flashed red. Error Next Track Operations System entering emergency diagnostic mode. Stand by for fear or tweet her instructions. Controllers stared in disbelief as their terminals froze, locking them out of the complex dance of aircraft, crew, and passengers they had been managing seconds earlier. The wall-sized monitors tracking Meridian's global operations displayed aircraft icons changing from green to yellow to red as the system lockout propagated across the network. What the hell is happening? Demanded Ryan Thompson, Director of Operations, as he rushed into the center, his tie askew, coffee sloshing from his mug. Is this a cyber attack? Systems saying it's an emergency diagnostic from Nexus Technologies, reported a senior controller, her voice tight with stress. It's locked us out of everything: flight planning, crew management, passenger manifest, gate assignments. Even the fuel calculation systems are offline. That's impossible, Ryan snapped, setting down his coffee and leaning over the controller's shoulder to see her terminal. Nexus can't just shut us down. There are protocols, notifications, procedures. Get them on the phone now. But the calls to Nexus Technologies support line went straight to an automated message. The NextTrack operations system is currently undergoing emergency diagnostic testing as specified in Contract Section 47. 3. Normal operation will resume pending authorization from Nexus Technologies Executive Management. On the central display, the statistics were already accumulating. 342 flights affected 47,823 passengers, stranded $537,000 in revenue, lost per minute, estimated $32.22 million per hour if the shutdown continued. At airports across the country, the impact rippled outward with devastating speed. In Chicago O'Hare, Meridian Flight 823 to Seattle was seconds from takeoff when the captain received an urgent message from company dispatch: hold position. System-wide operational pause in effect. Tower, Meridian 823, we need to return to the gate immediately, the captain radioed, his confusion evident even in the professional cadence. In Denver, passengers already boarded on Meridian Flight 1457 to Los Angeles watched in confusion as their plane, which had just pushed back from the gate, slowly returned to the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain announced, his voice betraying his own bewilderment. We've been instructed to return to the gate due to a system-wide operational issue. We don't have any further information at this time, but we'll update you as soon as we do. At Dallas-Fort Worth, a Meridian Airbus A320 that had been taxiing toward the runway came to a complete stop on the taxiway, the captain radioing the tower. Tower Meridian 329 were showing a company directive to halt all movement, requesting permission to hold position. Inside the terminal at JFK, the chaos was just beginning to unfold. The departure boards flickered as dozens of Meridian flights simultaneously changed status from on time to delayed, then to status unknown. At the Meridian customer service desks, lines began to form as confused passengers sought information. Gate agents stared helplessly at frozen computer screens, unable to access any data about flights, rebookings, or connections. We're experiencing a system-wide technical difficulty, they repeated over and over, the explanations sounding increasingly hollow as minutes passed and no resolution appeared. Inside Meridian's executive offices at JFK, Elena Rodriguez, VP of East Coast Operations, was in the middle of a routine morning briefing when her phone exploded with notifications. She scanned them in growing horror, the color draining from her naturally olive complexion. NextTrack is down company-wide. That's not possible, she muttered, rapidly typing on her laptop. Her screen displayed the same error message facing operations staff across the Meridian network. Emergency diagnostic mode initiated by Nexus Technologies Executive Protocol. Her phone rang Sofia Martinez herself, the CEO calling directly. Elena's stomach dropped to somewhere near her ankles. This was beyond serious. "Sofia, what the hell is happening?" she asked without preamble. "Jackson Reynolds," Sofia replied, her voice tight with controlled panic. "His daughters were denied boarding at JFK. Gate D36 flight to Paris. He's shutting us down." "Elena, the entire airline." "Every plane, every terminal, every system. He says we have 20 minutes to get his daughters on that plane or he'll extend the shutdown indefinitely." Reynolds, the CEO of Nexus. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as the implications cascaded through her mind. Why weren't they let on the plane? Something about fraudulent tickets. I don't have all the details. But Elena, we're losing $537,000 in revenue every minute this continues. We have almost 50,000 passengers stranded. Gate D36 needs to be your only priority right now. Fix this. Now. Elena was already moving, grabbing her security badge and phone, sprinting through the terminal in her Manolo Blahnik heels. The staccato clicks against the polished floor marking her desperate race against time. Her mind calculated the costs accumulating with each passing second. Meridian Airlines was bleeding money, reputation, and customer goodwill by the millisecond. Jackson Reynolds wasn't just any CEO. Nexus Technologies provided the technological backbone for half the aviation industry. Their NexTrack system was the central nervous system of Meridian's entire operation, controlling everything from crew scheduling to maintenance tracking, from passenger processing to real-time flight path optimization. Without it, they couldn't schedule flights, assign crew, process passengers, or even know where their aircraft were with any precision. And someone at gate D36 had just denied boarding to his children. By the time Elena arrived at the gate, breathless and perspiring despite the terminal's aggressive air conditioning, Amara and Aisha Reynolds were still standing where Aisha had made the call, watching with detached interest as the chaos unfolded around them. The gate area had transformed into a scene of confusion and growing panic. Passengers who had already boarded were being held on the plane with no explanation. Those waiting for other Meridian flights crowded around the gate podium, demanding information that Vanessa and Thomas couldn't provide because their terminals were frozen. Elena spotted the twins immediately, two poised young black women standing apart from the crowd, their composed expressions a stark contrast to the growing panic around them. She approached them cautiously, her brain connecting the dots with lightning speed. Reynolds, the Reynolds twins, daughters of Jackson Reynolds. How had Vanessa and Thomas failed to recognize the name of one of the most powerful tech CEOs in the world? "Miss Reynolds," she asked, addressing both of them, her voice carefully modulated to convey respect and urgent deference. "I'm Elena Rodriguez, VP of East Coast Operations for Meridian Airlines." The twins regarded her silently, neither offering assistance nor rejection. Their identical faces were masks of composed dignity that made them seem far older than 16. "On behalf of Meridian Airlines, I want to offer our most profound and sincere apologies for what happened here. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." She turned to Vanessa and Thomas, who were still trying to manage the growing crowd of confused passengers. Her professional demeanor cracked, revealing the raw fear and anger beneath. "You two," she hissed, gesturing them over with a sharp motion. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Thomas approached first, his earlier authority deflated but still clinging to procedure. "Ms. Rodriguez, we were following protocol. The system flagged their tickets as their father just shut down our entire airline." Elena cut him off, her voice low but intense. "Every single Meridian flight in the world is currently grounded. We're losing over $500,000 every minute, and it's because you couldn't be bothered to make a single phone call to verify their tickets." The color drained from Thomas's face as the magnitude of the situation hit him. Vanessa stood frozen, her expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and the dawning realization that her career was effectively over. "Jackson Reynolds," Elena continued, emphasizing each syllable, "the CEO of Nexus Technologies, the company that designed the very system you claimed flagged their tickets, is their father, the same Nexus Technologies that provides the software running every aspect of our airline's operations software that is currently in emergency diagnostic mode because of your incompetence and prejudice. The jet bridge, which had been retracted after boarding, suddenly whirred back to life, its mechanical groan cutting through the ambient terminal noise like an industrial banshee. Captain James Sullivan of Flight MR392 emerged from the aircraft door, his face etched with confusion and barely controlled anger. "Can someone tell me what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his captain's authority crackling through his words. "I've got 243 passengers asking why we're not moving, and dispatch is telling me the entire system is down. Every Meridian flight, worldwide." Elena turned to him, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Captain, we need to reopen the boarding door immediately. We have 2 passengers who need to board." She gestured to the twins, who stood watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of those who had seen the machinery of privilege, exposed not surprised by its existence, but by its sudden visibility to everyone else. Captain Sullivan took in the situation with the rapid assessment of someone with 22,000 flight hours of experience. His eyes moved from the twins to the VP to the ashen-faced gate agents. In his 30 years of flying, he had never seen anything like this: an entire airline grounded, a VP personally managing a boarding issue, a gate being reopened after final closeout. "Of course," he said finally, sensing that ordinary protocols had been thoroughly superseded by whatever cataclysm was unfolding. "We'll reopen immediately." As the jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with mechanical precision, Elena turned back to Thomas and Vanessa. Her voice was perfectly calm, which made her next words all the more devastating. "You are both terminated, effective immediately. Security is waiting by the employee exit to escort you from the building. Your badges are deactivated as of 30 seconds ago. HR will contact you regarding the terms of your separation, which I assure you will not be generous." Thomas began to protest. "Miss Rodriguez, I was following the enhanced passenger verification protocols that I—" "Save it for your lawyers." Elena cut him off, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "You've done enough damage for one day, for one career, actually." Just then, the ambient noise in the terminal shifted, like a theater audience when the lights dim. A path cleared through the crowd as Jackson Reynolds himself appeared, flanked by 2 security personnel in dark suits. He moved through the space with the calm, deliberate stride of someone who knew the world would adjust to his presence, not the other way around. He was not what many expected of a tech CEO: no hoodie or sneakers, no affected casualness. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit, his commanding presence needing no theatrical flourishes. He moved directly to his daughters, ignoring everyone else as if they were furniture rather than people. "Amara, Aisha," he said softly, placing a hand on each of their shoulders, his eyes scanning them for any sign of distress. "Are you okay?" They both nodded, the tension in their bodies visibly relaxing at his presence, though their expressions remained carefully composed. Only then did Jackson acknowledge Elena Rodriguez, who had been waiting respectfully for his attention. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her voice professional, but unable to completely mask the underlying panic. "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for this inexcusable incident. I assure you that the employees responsible have been terminated and that Meridian will be conducting a comprehensive review of our—" "Is the plane ready for my daughters to board?" Jackson interrupted, his voice perfectly pleasant but allowing for no diversion. "Yes, sir. The aircraft is ready and waiting. We can board them immediately." Jackson nodded, then finally, for the first and only time, looked at Vanessa and Thomas. He didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. His gaze, coolly assessing and dismissing them in the span of seconds, carried the full weight of his judgment. They had shown his children who they were. Now he was showing them who he was. "Aisha, Amara," he said, turning back to his daughters. "Let's just get you on your way to Paris." As they walked toward the jet bridge, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea before Moses, phones recording the dramatic conclusion to what would soon become a viral sensation. Inside the Meridian Airlines Operations Command Center in Atlanta, the frozen terminals suddenly flickered back to life at 11:38 a.m., exactly 21 minutes after the shutdown began. The next track system rebooted, status indicators changing from red to green as control was restored. A collective sigh of relief spread through the room, followed immediately by frantic activity as controllers worked to untangle the massive disruption to the airline's schedule. But the damage was done. For 21 minutes, one of the world's largest airlines had been completely paralyzed. 342 flights had been delayed. 47,000 passengers had been affected. Approximately $3 million in revenue had been lost. And it had all happened because two employees had looked at two black teenage girls and decided they didn't belong. The Reynolds twins' plane was still climbing through 10,000 feet when the first video hit Twitter. OMG! Did anyone else just see what happened at JFK? Hashtag Meridian Airlines just denied these two black girls boarding and their dads shut down the entire airline. Gate agent and manager fired on the spot. Hashtag Meridian shame, hashtag Black Girl Magic. The clip, shot by a passenger at a neighboring gate, showed Elena Rodriguez firing Thomas and Vanessa, followed by Jackson Reynolds' dramatic arrival. Within 30 minutes, it had been viewed 1.7 million times. By the time flight MR392 reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic, the story had exploded across social media platforms. Hashtags, hashtag Meridian shame, hashtag Reynolds twins, and hashtag Flying While Black were trending worldwide. News organizations scrambled to piece together what had happened, reaching out to both Meridian Airlines and Nexus Technologies for official statements. Meridian's hastily assembled press release only fueled the fire. Meridian Airlines apologizes unreservedly for an incident at JFK Airport where two passengers were incorrectly denied boarding. The employees involved have been terminated. We are conducting a full investigation and are cooperating with Nexus Technologies to address this isolated incident. The temporary system diagnostic that affected our operations has been resolved. The phrase temporary system diagnostic became instant fodder for memes and jokes. When your dad's temporary system diagnostic grounds an entire airline, hashtag boss move, hashtag Reynolds twins. Meridian temporary system diagnostic. Translation: a father just showed what happens when you mess with his kids. Hashtag parenting done right. But beneath the viral sensation, a more serious conversation was emerging. Black professionals across industries shared their own stories of being questioned, doubted, and denied in spaces where they belonged. I'm a neurosurgeon and patients still ask to see the real doctor when I walk in. Hashtag Flying While Black isn't just about flying. Executive at Fortune 100 company. Still get followed in high-end stores. Still get asked if I'm lost in first class. The Reynolds twins just had a father powerful enough to do something about it. Hashtag Meridian shame. As flight MR392 crossed the Atlantic, the twins were oblivious to their viral fame. Amara watched a French film on her personal screen, preparing for their Paris visit. Aisha stared out the window at the endless blue horizon, processing the events of the morning. They had experienced discrimination before, but never had they witnessed such immediate and spectacular consequences. Back in New York, Vanessa Matthews returned to her small Queens apartment in a daze. The security escort from JFK had been humiliating beyond words colleagues she'd worked with for 15 years, watching as her badge was confiscated. Her personal belongings gathered from her locker. Her entire career ended in 15 minutes. She unlocked her door with shaking hands, dropped her purse on the kitchen counter, and collapsed onto her sofa. The gravity of what had happened was still sinking in. She'd been fired, publicly, for denying boarding to the daughters of one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. She grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, seeking distraction. Instead, she saw her own face on the screen. CNN was running the story, "Tech CEO grounds airline after daughters denied boarding." The video was playing. Someone had captured the entire interaction, from her initial dismissal of the twins to Thomas backing her up, to Elena Rodriguez firing them both. Vanessa watched herself on national television. Her expressions of contempt and dismissal now broadcast to millions. Her phone began to ring. Her sister, then her mother, then numbers she didn't recognize. She silenced the device, but notifications continued to pour in. People had found her social media accounts. The comments were vicious, personal, overwhelming. She opened her laptop with trembling fingers, searching her own name. The results made her stomach drop. Page after page of news stories, all featuring her name and face. Meridian Gate agent fired after denying boarding to tech CEO's daughters. Racism at JFK, how one gate agent's actions grounded an airline. Flying While Black incident at JFK exposes ongoing discrimination in air travel. Her reputation was in freefall. Her career in the airline industry was over. No carrier would touch her after this. 15 years of seniority, benefits, and job security gone in an instant. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Human Resources at Meridian, informing her that her termination was for gross misconduct and that she would not be eligible for severance pay, continued health benefits, or positive references. The financial implications hit her like a physical blow. Her rent was due in 10 days. Her health insurance would end at midnight. Her savings would cover expenses for maybe 3 months, and that was being optimistic. A week later, Vanessa sat across from an attorney in a small office in downtown Queens, the summer heat making the window air conditioner work overtime. The lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Michael Greenberg, reviewed her case with thinly veiled pessimism. Ms. Matthews, I understand your desire to fight this termination, but I have to be frank with you. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The evidence against you is overwhelming and publicly available. It was a misunderstanding, Vanessa insisted, her voice hollow even to her own ears. I was following procedure. The system flagged their tickets. The lawyer sighed, replacing his glasses. The internal investigation at Meridian has already determined that no such flag existed in the system. Their tickets were perfectly valid. And even if there had been a flag, company protocol required you to call for verification, not deny boarding outright. But Thomas backed me up. He's a director, for God's sake. Yes, Mr. Wilson. The lawyer shuffled through his papers. That brings me to my next concern. There's an ongoing investigation into something called the Enhanced Passenger Verification Program that Mr. Wilson implemented. It appears to be at the center of a growing scandal. 2 months after the incident, Vanessa sat in her sister's guest bedroom in Pittsburgh, scrolling through job listings on her laptop. She had been forced to sublet her Queens apartment. No one would hire her in New York, where her face had become too recognizable. She had tried using her maiden name, Kalinsky, on applications. But background checks always revealed the truth. Her wrongful termination lawsuit against Meridian had been dismissed. The judge had cited overwhelming evidence of improper conduct and clear violation of company policy. Her life had effectively been split in two before Gate D36 and after. For Thomas Wilson, the aftermath took a darker turn. As Meridian's regional director of passenger experience, he had far more to lose than Vanessa. And as the architect of the Enhanced Passenger Verification Program, he had far more to hide. The day after the incident, Thomas returned to his spacious home in Bergen County, New Jersey, to find his Meridian email access revoked and his company phone disconnected. The security escort from JFK had been just the beginning. He poured himself a generous scotch, the amber liquid catching the afternoon light as he settled into his leather armchair. This was a PR disaster, but he had survived those before. Companies always needed scapegoats in these situations. He would lie low for a few weeks, then leverage his connections for a position at another airline. With his experience and the industry's short memory for scandal, he could be back on his feet by summer. What Thomas didn't know was that Elena Morales, an investigative journalist for the Atlantic Observer, had already received a trove of internal Meridian Airlines documents from a whistleblower inside the company's HR department. The whistleblower, disgusted by what had happened to the Reynolds twins and convinced it was part of a pattern, had decided to expose the truth behind the Enhanced Passenger Verification Program that Thomas had championed. Elena spent days sifting through the documents, her apartment walls covered with notes and printouts, strings connecting different pieces of evidence like a detective in a crime drama. What emerged was far more sinister than a single incident of discrimination at an airport gate. The EPV program, implemented 18 months earlier, had been presented internally as a fraud prevention measure. But the training materials and internal memos told a different story. Gate agents should pay particular attention to passengers who appear inconsistent with their ticket class or travel itinerary. Flag bookings where the passenger's demographic profile seems unusual for the type of fare purchased. Exercise enhanced scrutiny when luxury class tickets are purchased by individuals whose appearance, communication style, or documentation raises questions about the legitimacy of their travel. The language was carefully coded, but the intent was clear: target passengers who didn't fit the expected profile of first class or business class travelers. In practice, this meant subjecting passengers of color, particularly young Black passengers, to additional scrutiny and suspicion. Even more damning were the financial records Elena uncovered through further investigation. Thomas Wilson had received $4 million in payments from Veritas security consultants. the firm that had developed and implemented the EPV program. The payments had been routed through a shell company called Aviation Resource Management, which Thomas had established in the Cayman Islands. It was a classic kickback scheme. Thomas had sold the program to Meridian's executive team as essential for preventing fraud, all while pocketing millions from the security firm. The program itself was not just discriminatory, it was corrupt from its inception. Elena's article, titled Flying While Black: How Meridian Airlines Institutionalized Discrimination and One Executive Profited, was published on the Atlantic Observer's website at 5:00 a.m. on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the incident at JFK. By 9:00 a.m., Meridian Airlines' stock had dropped 17%. By closing bell, it was down 34%, wiping out billions in market value. CEO Sofia Martinez was summoned to an emergency board meeting. The Department of Transportation announced an investigation into discriminatory practices across the airline industry. And at 6:15 a.m., Thomas Wilson opened his front door to find 6 FBI agents with a warrant for his arrest on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Thomas Wilson, the lead agent announced, "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Thomas stood in his doorway, still in his bathrobe, as federal agents handcuffed him in full view of his neighbors. News helicopters appeared overhead within minutes, capturing aerial footage of his humiliation. The case against Thomas moved with unusual speed. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records showing the payments, emails discussing the implementation of the program, the EPV training materials themselves. His defense team attempted to portray him as a well-meaning executive who had been misled by Veritas security consultants. But the paper trail of his involvement was too extensive and detailed to dismiss. Former colleagues, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, testified against him. Veritas security consultants, facing its own federal investigation, claimed Thomas had approached them with the program concept, not the other way around. 8 months after denying boarding to the Reynolds twins, Thomas Wilson stood before a federal judge for sentencing, convicted on all counts. The judge, an African-American woman in her 60s with a reputation for meticulous fairness, delivered her verdict with measured precision. "Mr. Wilson, you have been found guilty of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. But beyond these financial crimes, you implemented a system designed to discriminate against passengers based on their appearance. You corrupted the very concept of security to enrich yourself while causing real harm to countless individuals." She paused, looking directly at him. "I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison and order restitution in the amount of $3.4 million. The gavel fell with finality. As federal marshals led him from the courtroom, Thomas caught a glimpse of himself in a reflective surface, hollowed cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, the shell of the confident executive who had stood at gate D36 and decided 2 young black women didn't belong in first class. The EPV program scandal expanded far beyond Thomas and Vanessa. Elena Morales' reporting revealed that similar passenger verification systems had been implemented at several major airlines, all following the Veritas security consultants model. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of passengers who had been targeted by these discriminatory practices. Internal audits at Meridian revealed that black passengers were 27 times more likely to have their tickets questioned under the EPV program. Despite fraud rates showing no correlation with race or ethnicity, Sofia Martinez resigned as CEO of Meridian Airlines, though she maintained she had been unaware of the true nature of the EPV program. The company's board appointed a chief diversity officer reporting directly to the new CEO and implemented mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. But for Vanessa Matthews, watching these developments from her sister's guest bedroom in Pittsburgh, the broader reckoning brought little comfort. Her life remained in ruins, no career, no home of her own, her reputation permanently damaged. She had become collateral damage in a system that Thomas Wilson had created and that she had enthusiastically enforced, never questioning the biases it codified or the harm it caused. She had been a weapon in someone else's corrupt scheme, and now she was paying the price for it. For the Reynolds twins, the viral fame eventually faded. Their trip to Paris continued as planned, though now with an unexpected layer of recognition. A shopkeeper on the Champs-Élysées asked if they were the famous Reynolds twins from the airline video. They returned to New York 2 weeks later to find the story still reverberating through conversations about race, privilege, corporate accountability, and the power of social media to expose injustice. But for Jackson Reynolds, watching the scandal unfold from his corner office at Nexus Technologies headquarters, something didn't feel right. He had won the battle spectacularly, definitively. His daughters had boarded their flight. The employees who had wronged them had been punished. The discriminatory system had been exposed. Yet as he sat in his library late one night, staring at a photograph of his daughters as young children, Amara with missing front teeth, Aisha with butterfly clips in her hair, both beaming with the uncomplicated joy of children who felt completely safe in their world, he couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was incomplete, even hollow. He had used his extraordinary power to tear down, to punish, to destroy. But what had he built? What had he changed for all the other daughters who didn't have fathers who could shut down corporations with a phone call? The question lingered, unanswered, as the media cycle moved on to new scandals and outrage. But for Jackson Reynolds, for Amara and Aisha, and for countless other families who didn't have the power to shut down an airline when faced with discrimination, the story was far from over. 3 months after the incident at JFK, Amara and Aisha Reynolds sat in the media room of their New York brownstone, watching the news of Thomas Wilson's sentencing. The enormous screen displayed his ashen face as he was led away in handcuffs, a far cry from the smug supervisor who had dismissed them with such casual contempt. The news anchor spoke gravely about corporate corruption, systemic discrimination, and justice served. Words like landmark case and watershed moment floated through the coverage. Legal experts weighed in on the significance of the conviction. Civil rights leaders praised the exposure of institutionalized bias. But there was no celebration in the room. No triumphant comments or satisfied smiles. Only a heavy silence that seemed at odds with what should have been a moment of vindication. Amara sat curled on a plush sofa, absently tracing patterns on the velvet cushion. Her usual vibrancy had dimmed somewhat in the months following the incident. The viral fame had been unsettling strangers on the internet dissecting their experience, debating whether their father's response had been justified, scrutinizing their reactions in freeze-framed video captures. Aisha sat perfectly still in an armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. Her analytical mind had been processing this experience differently, cataloging it, contextualizing it within larger systems of power and prejudice. She had been reading court documents from the case, following the class action lawsuit against Meridian, studying the technical implementation of the EPV program. Their father stood at the back of the room, a glass of water untouched in his hand. He watched the news coverage, but his eyes kept returning to his daughters, measuring the invisible impact of that day at JFK against the visible consequences now playing out on the screen. When the segment ended, the silence lingered for several moments before Amara spoke. "So that's it. He goes to prison, and everything's fixed." Her voice carried a bitter edge that had been absent before Gate D36. "Not fixed," Aisha replied quietly. "Changed. Maybe. For some people. Anyway." Jackson watched his daughters carefully, recognizing something in their demeanor that troubled him deeply. The incident had marked them, not just as a bad experience, but as a fundamental shift in how they saw the world, and perhaps more troublingly, how they saw themselves in it. That night, long after the girls had gone to their rooms, Jackson found himself in his library. It was his sanctuary, a room lined with first editions and technological treatises, a testament to a life built on logic and ambition. But tonight, the books offered no comfort. He bypassed his massive mahogany desk and walked to the mantelpiece where a silver-framed photograph stood. It showed Amara and Aisha at age 7, all missing teeth and joyous identical smiles, their arms thrown around his neck in unabashed affection. The memory of that day was crystal clear, a spontaneous picnic in Central Park. The twins sticky with ice cream and bubbling with the uncomplicated happiness of children who felt completely safe, completely loved, completely at home in their world. Jackson had built his empire to give them everything to construct a fortress of opportunity and privilege so high that no harm could ever reach them. He had failed. The walls had been breached in a way he hadn't anticipated, couldn't have prevented with all his billions. He replayed Aisha's call in his mind, the terrifying calm in her voice, a 16-year-old girl who had already learned to navigate humiliation with a composure that broke his heart. He remembered the blinding rage that had coursed through him, a fury that had allowed him to paralyze an entire corporation with 2 phone calls. In the moment, it had felt like justice. Now, in the quiet of his library, it felt like something else entirely, a colossal failure of imagination. He had used a sledgehammer to fix a watch. His power, but then he realized with a sickening clarity, was a blunt instrument. It could demolish, but it couldn't heal. It could punish, but it couldn't prevent. The next evening, he asked the girls to join him in the library. He didn't sit behind the imposing desk that separated him from the world. Instead, he sat with them in the worn leather armchairs near the unlit fireplace, creating a circle of equals. "I'm sorry, Sim," he said simply. After a long moment of silence, Amara looked up, a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. "For what, Dad? You fixed it. Thomas is in prison. Vanessa's life is ruined. The program is shut down. Isn't that what we wanted?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, but laden with a genuine confusion that made Jackson's heart ache. "No," he said slowly, shaking his head. "That's what I did. It's not the same as fixing it. I didn't fix anything. I just broke it harder than they broke us." He leaned forward, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "My entire life, I thought that building success was the answer. I thought that if I gave you every advantage, every comfort, every privilege, you would be safe. But I was wrong. I built a shield, but I never taught you about the battle." The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "The world will still see you before it sees anything else about you, and it will judge you." Jackson continued, "I didn't prepare you for that. I didn't even truly see it myself until that day at the airport." The raw honesty of his confession hung in the air. It was an apology not for the incident, but for his own blindness to the reality his daughters navigated every day. It was Aisha who broke the silence, her voice carrying a newfound weight, the quiet observer finally taking the floor. "You couldn't see it, Dad, not the way we do, but we did. We always have." She paused, then continued, giving voice to a lifetime of quiet indignities that flashed through her mind like a slideshow. "The sales associate who followed us through Saks Fifth Avenue last Christmas, even though you own stock in the company. The math teacher at Dalton who suggested I might want to try the regular track before seeing my placement scores. The country club member who asked if we were guests when we've been going there since we could walk." She took a breath, her composure momentarily cracking. "The security guard who made me open my bag at the MoMA benefit where you were being honored as a donor. None of it was as big as the airport, but it was all the same thing we're towing. What happened at JFK wasn't new. It was just louder." Her words landed with devastating precision. "It was one thing to understand prejudice as a concept, another entirely to realize your children had been navigating a minefield you hadn't even perceived. And what did I teach you by my response?" Jackson asked, his voice thick with emotion. "That justice means destruction, that power is only for punishment, that the only way to fight a broken system is to break it further." Amara leaned forward, her expression earnest. "But you protected us, Dad. You showed them they couldn't treat us that way." "I showed one airline they couldn't treat you that way," Jackson corrected gently. "But what about all the other Amaras and Aishas who don't have fathers who can shut down corporations? What happens to them when they stand at those gates?" The question hung between them, unanswerable yet demanding an answer. That conversation became the catalyst for what followed. The lingering anger and humiliation began to transmute, forged by their shared honesty into a sharp, gleaming sense of purpose. A few weeks later, the dining room table was not set for dinner, but covered in flowcharts, legal pads, and market research. The three of them were no longer father and victims, but a team of architects designing a new flight path. The Veritas model was corrupt, Aisha explained, gesturing to a diagram she had created. But it worked because it exploited existing biases and gave them a veneer of systemic legitimacy. What if we created a system that did the opposite, that actively identified and corrected for bias? And not just in airlines, Amara added, her natural energy finding a new channel. In hiring systems, loan applications, college admissions, anywhere algorithms are making decisions about people. Jackson studied his daughters with a mixture of pride and awe. They had taken a moment of trauma and were alchemizing it into something remarkable. "We need a two-pronged approach," he suggested. Technology to address the systems, but also accountability to address the humans operating them. The Reynolds Initiative for Equitable Systems was announced at a press conference 6 months after the JFK incident. Jackson Reynolds, flanked by his daughters, outlined their vision to a packed auditorium of journalists and industry leaders. "Power should not be a weapon used to avenge a personal wrong," he stated, his voice resonating with conviction. "It should be a tool used to dismantle the systems that create those wrongs in the first place." The initiative was established with an initial endowment of $2 billion from Reynolds' personal fortune. Its mission was twofold. First, it would provide robust, no-strings-attached funding for investigative journalism that held power accountable. Its first official act was to establish the Accountability Journalism Fund, with Elena Morales as its director, empowering investigative reporters to expose systemic discrimination across industries. Second, the initiative would create an incubator for developing open-source AI auditing tools. These tools would identify and eliminate bias in the algorithms increasingly governing modern life, from hiring processes to loan approvals, from facial recognition to predictive policing. In a move that surprised many, Jackson named Amara and Aisha as co-chairs of the initiative's Youth Advisory Board, giving them direct influence over its direction and priorities. The experience had irrevocably changed them. Amara, once absorbed by fashion and social media, discovered her voice in activism. She channeled her formidable energy into creating the initiative's social media presence, storyboarding a powerful campaign she titled Unsaid Stories, inspired by Aisha's observation about the little things they had always faced. The campaign featured short, compelling videos of everyday microaggressions, making the invisible visible. It grew into a platform where young people of color could share their experiences, creating an undeniable body of evidence about the reality of modern discrimination. A young Black doctor being mistaken for a janitor in his own hospital, a Latina executive being asked to serve coffee in a meeting she was leading, a teenage boy being followed by security at a high-end electronics store while shopping for his own birthday present. Aisha, the quiet storm, had found her calling at the nexus of technology, law, and justice. She immersed herself in courses on constitutional law and machine learning, her brilliant mind finding purpose in the complex code of society. She began developing frameworks for algorithmic auditing, her notes filled with a passion that was both intellectual and deeply personal. "Most bias detection focuses on outputs," she explained during a presentation to the initiative's tech team, "but we need to examine the training data, the model architecture, and the implementation environment as an integrated system." The Reynolds Initiative's first major project was a collaboration with 5 major airlines to develop bias-neutral passenger verification systems. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very industry that had humiliated the twins was now working with them to transform its practices. Meridian Airlines, under new leadership, was notably absent from the initial collaboration. But 6 months into the project, their new CEO, David Rodriguez, no relation to Elena, approached Jackson about joining the effort. "We've learned our lesson the hard way," he admitted during a tense meeting at Nexus headquarters. "We want to be part of the solution." The initiative expanded rapidly. Within its first year, 14 major corporations had adopted its algorithmic auditing tools, discovering and addressing biases they hadn't recognized in their own systems. A congressional hearing on algorithmic bias featured Aisha as an expert witness, her poised testimony belying her 17 years. Universities incorporated the initiative's case studies into their computer science ethics courses. Tech startups focused on bias mitigation found funding and mentorship through its incubator program. Journalists supported by its grants exposed discriminatory practices across industries, from healthcare to housing. The most powerful impact came from the stories the initiative collected and shared. Thousands of individuals documented their experiences with bias, creating a database that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The patterns became undeniable, the evidence irrefutable. For the Reynolds family, the work became a form of healing. Jackson found a new dimension to his power, not just the ability to tear down, but to build up. The twins discovered that their vulnerability could be transformed into a strength that helped others. 1 year after the incident at JFK, Amara and Aisha Reynolds boarded another international flight. This time, the gate agent, trained under new protocols developed with input from the Reynolds Initiative, greeted them with professional courtesy, making no assumptions based on their age or race. As they settled into their first-class seats, Amara nudged her sister. "Remember Thomas's face when Dad showed up at the gate?" she whispered, a mischievous glint in her eye. Aisha smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her serious face. I prefer to remember the face of that girl at the initiative's youth summit last month, when she realized she could actually do something about the discrimination she was facing. Jackson, overhearing as he stowed his carry-on, felt a surge of pride so intense it almost overwhelmed him. His daughters had taken their pain and transformed it into purpose, their humiliation into a mission that was already changing lives. The plane accelerated down the runway, gathering speed for takeoff. As it lifted into the sky, Jackson thought about how far they had come since that day at Gate D36. The incident had exposed a truth he had tried to shield his daughters from, that the world would judge them by their appearance regardless of their achievements or status. But it had also revealed something else, something far more powerful, that his extraordinary daughters, when faced with injustice, chose not merely to punish it, but to transform it. Not merely to win their own battle, but to change the war itself for everyone who would fight it after them. Vanessa Matthews had not disappeared entirely. In a strange twist of fate, her very public downfall had led her to a new path. After months of unemployment and depression, she had been approached by a community center in Pittsburgh that specialized in bias awareness training. They wanted her to speak about her experience, not as a villain, but as someone who had participated in a discriminatory system without questioning it, initially resistant. Vanessa eventually agreed, desperate for any income. But something unexpected happened during those sessions. Forced to articulate what she had done and why, she began to recognize patterns in her thinking, biases she had never acknowledged. "I never saw myself as racist," she told a group one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "But when those girls approached my counter, I made assumptions based entirely on how they looked. I never even considered they might actually belong in first class. And I ruined my entire career because of it." It wasn't redemption, not exactly, but it was a kind of reckoning, a public acknowledgement of harm done and lessons learned. The community center eventually hired her part-time to develop training materials based on her experience at Meridian. Thomas Wilson's story had no such turn toward rehabilitation. 8 months into his 8-year sentence at a federal prison camp in Pennsylvania, he remained bitter and unrepentant. He maintained that he had been made a scapegoat for corporate practices that were widespread in the industry, that his only crime was getting caught. In his prison bunk, he kept a newspaper clipping about the Reynolds Initiative, his former adversaries now leading a movement for systemic change while he counted days on a calendar. His power, privilege, and freedom stripped away completely. The contrast between these two outcomes, Vanessa's halting steps toward understanding and Thomas's entrenched denial, illustrated the complex reality of accountability. Not everyone learned the same lessons from the same experience. Not every story ended with enlightenment or redemption. But for the Reynolds family, the focus had shifted from the individuals who had wronged them to the systems that had enabled and rewarded that behavior. They had discovered that true justice wasn't just about punishing specific acts of discrimination, but about creating a world where such acts became less likely, less rewarded, less normalized. 1 year and 3 months after the incident at Gate D36, Amara and Aisha Reynolds celebrated their 18th birthday. The party, held in their brownstones garden, was intimate, close friends, family, key members of the initiative's team. As Jackson watched his daughters laugh and talk with their guests, he marveled at their resilience, their brilliance, their determination to make meaning from injustice. They had been denied their seats, so they had decided to redesign the whole airport. They had transformed a moment of powerlessness into a movement for change. In doing so, they had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that the true measure of power was not the ability to destroy in anger, but to create with purpose, not to shut things down, but to open them up, not to exclude others, but to ensure that everyone could find their seat at the table or on the plane. The karma that had struck down Vanessa and Thomas was a finite, explosive event, a reckoning that had faded with the news cycle. The change the Reynolds family now championed was quieter, more deliberate, and designed to be permanent, a systemic course correction to ensure that no one else would have to burn down the world to be seen. Because the world itself had finally learned how to open its eyes. 2 years after the incident at JFK, Amara and Aisha Reynolds stood at another airport gate, this time at San Francisco International. They were flying to a technology conference where they would present the Reynolds Initiative's latest algorithmic auditing tool, a system designed to detect and correct bias in facial recognition software used by transportation hubs worldwide. The gate agent, a young Asian American woman named Jennifer, greeted them with professional courtesy. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds and Miss Reynolds. Your seats in first class are confirmed. Would you like to board now?" The interaction was unremarkable in its normalcy, exactly as it should have been. No suspicion, no double-checking, no assumptions. Just two passengers with valid tickets being treated with respect. As they walked down the jet bridge, Aisha nudged her sister. "Remember when this used to be an ordeal?" Amara nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "It still is for a lot of people. That's why our work matters." They settled into their first-class seats, Amara immediately connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi to check the initiative's social media accounts, while Aisha reviewed her presentation notes. At 18, they had become recognized voices in the growing movement for algorithmic justice. Their traumatic experience at Gate D36 transformed into a catalyst for systemic change. Jackson Reynolds had remained in San Francisco for additional meetings, planning to join them at the conference the following day. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the twins exchanged a glance of quiet satisfaction. They were no longer traveling under their father's protection. They were advancing their own mission, carrying forward work that had grown far beyond a single incident of discrimination. The Unsaid Stories campaign that Amara had launched had become a global phenomenon, with over 3 million user-submitted videos documenting everyday experiences of bias and discrimination. Major corporations had begun using it as training material, and schools incorporated it into their curriculum on digital citizenship and social justice. Aisha's framework for algorithmic auditing had been adopted by 17 major tech companies and was being considered as the foundation for new federal regulations on AI ethics. Her insistence on open-source development ensured that the tools remained accessible to smaller organizations and advocacy groups who couldn't afford proprietary solutions. The Reynolds Initiative had expanded beyond its initial focus to address bias in healthcare algorithms, lending decisions, automated hiring systems, and predictive policing software. Its investigations had led to major reforms at institutions ranging from university admissions offices to mortgage lenders. But perhaps the most significant transformation had been in the airline industry itself, the place where their journey had begun. The old enhanced passenger verification program had been replaced across multiple airlines with a new approach developed in collaboration with the Reynolds Initiative. The new system emphasized customer service rather than suspicion, included regular bias audits, and featured an independent review process for any passenger who felt unfairly targeted. Gate agents underwent regular training to recognize and counteract implicit bias, with performance reviews that weighted customer experience alongside security compliance. Frontline staff were empowered to resolve issues rather than escalate them unnecessarily. The results were measurable. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased by 73% industry-wide. Boarding processes moved more efficiently when staff weren't creating unnecessary confrontations. Customer satisfaction scores improved across demographics. And for Vanessa Matthews, the journey had come full circle in an unexpected way. After working at the community center in Pittsburgh, she had been approached by the Reynolds Initiative to consult on their airline industry reform projects. Her firsthand experience with the flawed EPV program made her uniquely qualified to identify how similar systems might fail in the future. The offer had come with clear conditions. She would need to publicly acknowledge her actions at Gate D36, participate in the initiative's bias training programs, and commit to ongoing education about structural racism. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a recognition that even those who had caused harm could contribute to repairing it. After much soul-searching, Vanessa had accepted. Now she traveled to airports across the country, sharing her story with airline staff as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unexamined bias, both for passengers and for employees who enforce discriminatory systems. "I lost everything because I looked at two young women and made assumptions about who they were and where they belonged," she told a group of trainees at a session in Dallas. "I never questioned the program I was implementing or the biases behind it. And that cost me my career, my home, my reputation, but it cost those young women something too. It robbed them of their dignity, their sense of belonging, their right to move through the world without being questioned." Thomas Wilson, meanwhile, continued to serve his sentence, his appeals denied, his restitution payments garnished from the assets that hadn't been seized in the federal investigation. He had become a case study in corporate ethics courses, an example of how corruption and bias could become intertwined, each enabling and reinforcing the other. As Flight 217 climbed into the clear California sky, Aisha gazed out the window at the shrinking landscape below. From this height, individual buildings merged into neighborhoods, neighborhoods into cities, cities into the vast tapestry of human civilization. It was a powerful metaphor for their work addressing not just individual incidents of discrimination, but the broader patterns they formed when viewed from a higher perspective. The systemic nature of bias became visible only when you could see enough of the picture. "What are you thinking about?" Amara asked, noticing her sister's contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about Dad," Aisha replied, "about how he could have just used his power to punish Vanessa and Thomas and left it at that. How we could have just accepted that as justice and moved on." Amara nodded, understanding immediately. "Instead, he taught us that real power isn't about who you can hurt when you're angry. It's about what you can build when you're purposeful." "Exactly," Aisha said softly. "And that's the lesson that matters." The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the sisters returned to their respective tasks, Amara to her social media campaign, Aisha to her presentation notes. The traumatic incident at Gate D36 had not defined them. It had not limited them. It had become, instead, the foundation for work that would help ensure others wouldn't face the same humiliation. They had been denied their seats, so they had redesigned the entire journey. And in doing so, they had discovered that true justice wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about transformation of systems, of institutions, and ultimately, of themselves. The Reynolds twins story reminds us that discrimination can happen anywhere, even to those with privilege and resources. But it also shows that true change requires more than individual punishment. It demands systematic reform. When faced with injustice, we can choose to simply react, or we can transform that moment into a movement that creates lasting change for everyone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your experiences matter, and your voice can help create the changes we need to see. Let us know in the comments if you've witnessed or experienced discrimination and how you addressed it. For more stories that examine the hidden systems shaping our world and the people working to transform them, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Together, we can build a world where everyone's dignity is recognized and respected, no matter where they're seated.